Good evening. My name is Paul Meehan, and I am the chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum Northwest, and I'm welcoming you to our AR, VR, MR, XR Gala. We're delighted that this came together as well as it did, so thanks very much to our panelists for convincing each other that they should be here tonight. The MIT Enterprise Forum is an organization of dedicated professionals with 28 chapters located around the globe, affiliated with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology through the MIT Technology Review. So we are licensed by MIT. We inform, connect, and coach technology entrepreneurs, enabling them to rapidly transform ideas into world-changing companies. You're cordially invited to our Meet the Angels Forum, which will be later in April, and a chance to meet representatives from each of the major angel groups in Seattle, if you're an entrepreneur. Or if you'd like to join one of the angel groups and encourage entrepreneurs financially, that's cool too. And our May program will be on education in the 21st century and how to get into campuses legally. And I say this as a proud USC graduate. What's especially bad is that my father was faculty there, so I'm afraid it's not all good. We are a volunteer-run organization of people who seek to be inspired and educated through technology leadership. This program would not have been possible without the dedication of the following volunteers: Željko Želic, John Locke, Alexander Theo Harris, Toussaint Myrix, who's here, Mark Anderson, Louis Quixel, Melissa McQueen, Krista Lynn, and Forrest Gibson. We're always looking for more volunteers, so definitely contact us. Our programs are made possible by Freelock Computing, the MIT Club of Puget Sound, the Harvard Club of Seattle, Keiretsu Forum, and DigiPen. Our moderator tonight is Bob Rosner. Did I get that right? Okay, more or less. Bob's a best-selling author, award-winning journalist, and national TV contributor for the Today Show, CBS This Morning, and CNBC. In addition to local work with King, Q13, and Como, he's been a consultant and board member of a variety of nonprofit organizations, including ACT Theater, the Rotary Club of Seattle, and Ryther. However, we have a special thing going on tonight in that you're going to interact using your phones with what's being presented. And to explain how that is all going to happen is Louis Quixel. So.
No applause necessary. So we're using an application called Poll Everywhere, and you can see the poll or the response options up here. You can text my name, Louis Q, 600 to the number 22333. The first time you do that will just be acknowledging that you're a part of the system. You just text Louis Q 600 to 22333 once, and then after that, you can respond to any of the questions as they appear in the slides. And the response options, if there are any, will be shown. So if you're going to vote A for question 1, you just text A to this number after you've done this. You can also go to their website, pollev.com/LouisQ600. And here is Bob to introduce the guests.
Did everybody get that? Punching your phone? We really want to poll you throughout the evening, so please do follow those steps. I want to begin with a quote from Eric Schmidt of Google, who said, "The internet is the largest experiment in anarchy that we have ever seen." And as far as I'm concerned, it was nothing compared to these people and the anarchy they're creating. So let's start with some definitions. Augmented reality, AR, is computer-generated graphics on top of actual reality. Pokemon Go is an example. Virtual reality has computer-generated graphics create an entire virtual world. HTC Vive is an example. And then there's mixed reality, which is a blend of AR and VR, and HoloLens is an example of that. Just to be sure we're all on the same page in terms of what these technologies are. One of my favorite quotes on this subject is from Scott Adams of Dilbert fame, and he said, "When virtual reality gets cheaper than dating, society is doomed." So with that thought, we're going to dive into virtual reality. So let's begin with introducing our panel. Ricardo, why don't you wave? The founder and CEO of Kronos Global Academy, first to offer VR AR training to the public. Why don't you start with a little minute opening statement?
Hi, everybody. Okay. I founded Kronos Global Academy back in the beginning of 2015. We were looking at teaching this new technology to the masses and the general public, and doing it in such a way that anybody can do it. We've had a lot of success along the way. I'd love to talk about it, but mainly one of the things that I wanted to just bring to the table is how we don't have enough people in the industry of creating content for virtual and augmented reality. And this is one of the problems that we've had with virtual reality, and there's just a lack of good quality, compelling content that would drive people to the store to purchase equipment that then they can consume the content. So that's one of the things that we are addressing.
I just want to warn the panel that if you turn around, your face is like 30 feet tall, so just don't want you to freak out when you turn around. Jude Dahl, wave to the crowd, please. Came from a traditional web and mobile product management background, B2B and B2C. Remember when that was the rage? I love that. Active practitioner of VR for good, bringing people closer together digitally or physically. Any thoughts to start, Jude?
I want to start with why I created my company. When I just started in VR AR about 2 years ago, if you are a newbie, you probably face the same issue that I was facing, is where to find VR, where to use it, how to understand it, and where to find the content. So I created Immersive Square. Basically is an event listing platform for VR specific events. It helps general consumers to find VR events around you. And that's just a self-intro into the VR space. And started from there. Now I curate some events, and I support event technology, and I also produce VR. So if you're a newbie, this is a life story to tell you that it's a great journey to start. And my quick thought on VR is very much aligned with one success factor of the VR industry, which is accessibility. We want to make VR accessible by everyone.
I'm about to introduce Jeff Rayner, and he is the boy who brought all the toys, so I think he deserves a little round of applause for all of the stuff that you brought. He's a U.S. immigrant with 20 years experience leading tech startups, CEO of MX Treaty. Did I get? No.
Mixed reality.
Mixed reality. He's too damn cool with his name. He's a digital media solutions company leveraging the very latest VR, AR, drones. Oh man, he's got everything up his sleeve. So take it away, Jeff.
Hi. So we have this digital media solutions company, but you're probably thinking, what on earth does that really mean? What it means is we're turning the approach on trying to develop solutions for you, to trying to listen to what you guys want and develop solutions directly for you. So as you can see from this bench, and perhaps some of the experiences you've already had, there's no end to what this new digital wave can offer us. Whether you have a disability, whether you are fully bodied, there is a whole suite of solutions that can completely change your life. Whether that's in gaming, whether that's in using office software, whether that's telecommuting. This industry is changing. We have no idea exactly where it's going. What we're doing is producing solutions. We currently have something actually at PacSci, thanks Diana over there. We have something at Mopop, and we have something at Space Needle. And every one of those experiences is completely different. And it appeals to everyone, which is the wonderful thing about what we're doing. There is no longer this, oh, I can't play that because I actually don't have my arms, use of my arms anymore. I can't play that because I'm in a wheelchair. I can't play that, I can't afford a VR headset. We're at this point now where these devices are becoming collaborative, where companies like ours are starting to join forces and figure out yeah, we don't have to work in competition, we can work together. And hopefully by the end of tonight, you guys will realize as well, this isn't just us, this is your input that's going to change everything that we do.
And I just want everyone to know that I've got first dibs on the VR sandals.
They're cool.
They're very cool. Martina Welkoff on the end. She can wave, I guess. Okay, there you go. She's an entrepreneur who started out in mobile gaming. She's a co-founder of Seattle Women in Tech and has long been a women's advocate in technology. She's a founding partner of WXR Fund, focusing on women-led companies. Martina.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that inclusion is a theme throughout these introductions and accessibility and talking about how we want to get more people involved in the industry, because that's very much the thrust of my work and a big part of why I'm so passionate about XR and the opportunities therein. I firmly believe it's the most transformative computing paradigm we've experienced yet. It's more powerful and also more vulnerable than any other kind of digital interface and interaction that we've had available to us prior to this point in history. And so I think it's absolutely imperative that we have, I oftentimes say it's an all hands on deck situation, and we need people with different perspectives and different backgrounds and different voices in the room deciding how these products are made and contributing to what that future is going to look like. And so that's really what I'm passionate about. We're focused on making sure women are resourced early on and that their startups are successful and grow. And there's a lot of other dimensions of diversity I'm very passionate about as well, but we can get into that.
This panel is going to also do an experiment. It's the first panel I've ever seen that has to share a microphone. So we'll see how much they actually are able to
Very
collaborate.
collaborative.
I know, it's wonderful. A quote from Laurie Anderson, performance artist, said, "Virtual reality won't look real until they put dirt in it." It's one of my favorite quotes. Ricardo. Virtual reality is a new paradigm for computing. What's changing? Why would you say that?
Yeah, I've been saying that it's a new paradigm because actually I've been looking for the next computing platform for some time. So when I discovered virtual reality as a consumer product that was coming onto the market, I jumped on it. So yeah, we've gone from mainframes to the PC revolution, then we had laptops show up, and we got into the mobile revolution, and then I've been thinking what's going to be next. And I acquired an Oculus DK2 back in 2014, and this was 2 years after the Oculus Kickstarter, and I was just convinced that this was going to be a new paradigm. So it is immersive. It is basically just a highway of information directly to your brain. It is incredibly powerful. It is a way to connect people. A lot of people think of virtual reality as something that is isolating, but I don't think that those of us that are active in the industry see it that way at all. It's actually a great way to connect people. And you don't have to be physically together to have that connection. You can be anywhere in the world. So that's just how I see it.
When you say a highway directly into people's brain, am I the only person who had a little chill come down my spine? Facebook, other technology companies, we have some questions about. Is there anything, and any panelist can dive in here, is there anything we should be nervous about in terms of the capability of this technology? Martina, you seem to infer that there is a potential dark side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's very, very important to be aware of now and try to get in front of some of the downfalls we're seeing play out in other platforms we're currently using, and how they're impacting not only our personal lives but our society, and have major cultural impacts. So there are a lot of people in the industry actually thinking seriously about these things and trying to create sort of a collaborative leadership approach. So there's an entity called the XR Association, and all the tech giants are part of it. And from what I can tell, it's actually a truly collaborative effort to try to come up with an agreed ethical framework across all of those major platforms, and as well as in the long run influence the regulatory environment and fund research, and try to understand these things before it's reactionary. So I'm encouraged by that, and I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that are happening at University of Washington, the Virtual World Society. There's some great work being done, and I think the key is making sure there's enough there are enough resources behind that work, and also that people are paying attention, and particularly I know on the legislative side that we can maybe take action before we're again in that reactionary position of trying to fix what is broken. So I think the major danger is that it's a very intimate, vulnerable experience, and you can get a whole lot of data, and we have to make sure that we're protecting the end user ultimately.
Thank you. Before I ask Jeff a question, I want to point out to the panel we've got a what is the biggest obstacle to mass adoption behind you, and there's a word cloud. So if you want to check that out at some point, it's kind of interesting. Jeff, will VR take over the world?
Yes.
Next question.
Yes and no, I guess is the best way to answer that. Let's start with both, the yes and the no together actually. What I mean by that is VR is not a static word, let alone a static device, let alone a static platform, let alone a static solution. In fact, it would have been great to have done a poll right at the beginning to say, what does VR mean to you? Some people would say, VR for me is a 360 environment, right? Some people, perhaps older school folks, would have said, oh, it's just a digital world that's created that I can look at on a computer. You ask an 18-year-old and they would probably say a VR headset. And there's numerous nuances in between that. You might have heard of something called stereoscopic, right, versus monoscopic viewpoints. So with your eyes, for example, when you look at an object, you can either see it just an object, or if I look at it through two, I can see a slight three-dimensionality to it. They're both VR as well. There is no one definition of VR, and there won't be, right? I think it's evolving, it's changing, just like when the phone first came out and all it was supposed to do was make a phone call. And now look at it, it rules our lives. I'm not saying VR will necessarily take over the world, but there's always, back to your point a moment ago about the dark side, you know, if I actually, you don't know this, but you've got a secret button here, and if I touch it, then you're going to wake up from this world that you think is real, and you'll find your whole life was a virtual reality.
You're scaring the crap out of me.
But no, seriously, right? There is, as technology gets better and better, the data that is being tracked on everything we do, there's a good side to that, an amazingly good side. But there is also this dark side that we have to be careful of. In addition, you mentioned MR, right? And again, this mixed reality, hence our company name, right? Where these different realities actually merge. And where they kind of intersect and where they go, we're just beginning to understand. So I think the benefits of these things, just even Office applications alone right now, where you have to alt-tab to jump between one screen and another. In VR, you can have an infinite number of screens all around you. In AR, you can take those screens wherever you go. At first, that seems a bit daunting, but then you take someone who's in a wheelchair that loves the concept of having devices and technology right at their fingertips, right? Which is, it's really hard if you're living in a wheelchair with limited movement to be able to actually tap into your email versus YouTube. But in things like VR and AR, and eye tracking particularly, it's super easy for them all of a sudden. And so there is definitely this dark side we've got to keep our eye on, but the potential benefits for everyone are just immense.
Anybody else want to comment on the?
I just want to add it from like human experience perspective. I feel that VR, it will be part of the future, but immersive experience will be the future. I think we as human beings continue to evolve, and we will continue to pursue more and more immersive experience because we are just spoiled with a better and better experience, and that's what we want to push for. So if we think from experience perspective, a lot of things make more sense and more natural and organic to us.
Jeff, I think your company is missing the big opportunity, which is kids' birthday parties, but that's just me. Martina, you discussed hype cycles, and then you talked about early stage funding. Can you bring a little adult practicality to this? Where is the industry at? What needs to happen?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride the last few years. So for VR, the peak of the hype cycle was in late 2015, early 2016, right after the Rift and Vive first shipped, and a a lot of capital flooded into the space. There was a lot of optimism. The projections, if you look back, were wildly unrealistic, but of course at the time everyone felt like this was going to hit overnight and be the next big thing, which I think all of us still firmly believe it's going to be the next big thing, but of course it didn't hit overnight. And so the last couple of years we've been wading through the trough of disillusionment, you know, the adoption curve, when you have the peak and then you have the trough. Capital has definitely dried up. It's been harder to raise money, but the good news is that we are coming out of that, and there's some really compelling signals that this year already funding has picked up, and Mark Andreessen is very enthusiastic, and he tends to be someone people follow. So they just did they led a $68 million round in a location-based entertainment company called Sandbox VR. And AR has been great for reviving some venture enthusiasm for the space as well, because of course we have a lot more users who have access to AR, and once ARKit and ARCore became available, a lot of developers started creating some interesting content there. So that's another space that has helped to bolster some of the capital that's available. And we actually saw, when we first started, we started running an accelerator in early 2018, and the first batch of applications was about 70% VR companies, and then the remainder some mix of AR and a little bit of both. And we saw that almost completely invert even just 6 months later, in a short span of time, that the vast majority of companies that applied for that second cohort were doing both VR and AR. And so it's been interesting to see how the market's adapted to the technologies that are available, the platforms that are available for developers, as well as the capital that's available. And you know, it's a bit of a push and pull, chicken and egg, but I do think, I just got back from South by Southwest last week, and I can say definitively that the enthusiasm for immersive tech this year was way higher than last year. It was everywhere, and there were a lot more VCs wanting to meet with immersive tech companies.
I want to ask this of any panel member. I'm guessing there's at least a few people in the room who have a great idea and they want to start their venture. This is free advice time. Does anybody have free advice for anybody who wants to start an AR/VR venture?
I think the biggest thing is just start building. Don't wait. Just start experimenting. Start learning. There's so much to learn, and it's a really exciting, chaotic time. We're all learning together. So I'd say just dive in, get in there.
Anybody else?
Just one line, the learning curve is very high and steep, but the creative reward is super high too.
And to piggyback off Martina's comment there's more than one burger joint in town, right? If you look at all this tech equipment here, Jude even said to me earlier, she goes, "Oh, you guys are doing some stuff with smells? We considered doing that." And there's another gentleman who was talking to me earlier. If you've got an idea, just go for it. There is such a huge market out there that, in fact, we're working in some of these areas. There's 2 different foot controls we're working with. We connect those guys together. This is a co-opetition. It's not competition. There's a huge market. We need more ideas. So if you've got it, just go for it.
Yeah, I'll make a comment about that's tied to our academy. I think we're all excited about this medium because of what it can provide for us in a future that doesn't exist yet. And I want to enjoy that personally. And a lot of the stuff that we want to have just doesn't exist yet. So what it takes is for people that have a unique idea to really bring it forth and then go get the funding and start the company because they're passionate about bringing that into the world. And VR by itself is not that useful of a technology. But when you combine it with something that you understand well and is useful, then it becomes very powerful. Music comes to mind, and just as an example, right? So there's that. The other aspect is that we're kind of on the front lines, driving the industry, and so it's not easy. But for me, it's more rewarding than to just sit back and wait that somebody will do the work, so that one day we can enjoy the full potential of this medium. So there's that. It's like I experience that as hard work right now, but it's also very rewarding to just have the satisfaction that we're working with great people and just creating things.
Yeah, go for it.
Just one more thing as well. Tech, which is actually the real reason we got together originally. tech for the last 20 years has been very male dominated, and I think everyone would agree there's no need for that, there's no place for that in society right now. The wonderful thing about these new emerging technologies is there is no bias whatsoever. It's fascinating when I was first approached to join this panel, and I said to my team, several are here right now, we had no bias, no thought of bias, but when we look around who comprises that team, we have a very diverse group, and it was completely organic, right? So if there are anyone who has a disability, if there is anyone who's a minority, if there is anyone, irrespective of your sexual preference, I think this is the right time and this is the right industry to get involved, because I think diversity, it's not even looked at, it's just what can you offer? And that's a wonderful time to be in this space.
This was the one topic that they all wanted to talk about. So pass the microphone, you all talk about diversity.
So I agree with the sentiment that it's certainly a welcoming space, and in terms of funding, we are actually doing slightly better in XR than other tech spaces. So venture capital broadly went to about 2%. 2% of venture capital that was invested last year went to all women teams. Now, granted, that's only women on the founding teams. It gets closer to 10 if you look at. There's some different ways to slice the data, but it rarely gets above 10, even in the most favorable frames. XR is actually up at 18%, so we're considerably ahead of the game in that regard. Still not great. 18% still not amazing, so there's still a lot of work to do. And the one piece I would refute is I think there is bias. I think it's important to recognize that we live in a world with bias, and people are all coming in with their baggage. Everyone has their own lenses and their ways of assuming, ways of making sense and assuming things about other people. But I agree that there's more openness, and I've certainly found the XR community to be incredibly welcoming and proactively encouraging diversity. So I think that's encouraging, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that there is still bias, and we need to work through that, and that there's a lot of work to do overall in improving the numbers.
Well said. Just said what I wanted to say. Just one thing that I wanted to be a little bit specific is when you, as male founders, look at your team, not only the number of the women and the people of color on your team, but also the role. Right, the gender role is a very important thing to look into in tech industry. Are they running product? Are they running platform? Running engineering? And making product decisions. Those are very important things to keep in mind.
Sure. Martina mentioned that there is bias, and but I think that VR offers something really unique in terms of the user experience, in which we can. I don't want to be idealistic and say remove bias, but we definitely have an opportunity to remove bias as much as possible. So, for example, I know for a fact, like from a lot of experience, that VR can provide a connection that can bring people closer together very, very quickly. Because anything that involves, like Jeff was saying, your age, your religion, or your sexual orientation, those things are not important in VR. In fact, you could probably be of the opposite gender if you want to be, and the other person won't know. That connection is really not about that. That connection is about your essence, what you have to provide of value to that person, because otherwise, why would you even be connecting with someone in virtual reality? And there's a lot of activity happening in virtual reality. So Martina was talking about bias in terms of people coming into the industry, because it's a great industry, but I'm talking in terms of people actually doing things in virtual reality. Eventually we're going to have jobs in virtual reality and doing a lot of those things. And I think it's very exciting, the fact that you could be talking to somebody that's just, let's just say, very, very young in age, but you might think that they're advanced in age because they're just very, very knowledgeable about the subject that you're interested in. And it won't matter. Finding out their age is just not important, or their location, or that sort of thing.
One last thing on that. Just a quick show of hands. Has anybody here seen Ready Player One? Roughly about half? Yeah, so anyone who has, we'll just back up Ricardo's statement there, right? That's one of the premises of the movie. When you're experiencing these worlds, you can be anyone. In the real world, you may have a disfigured face and find it really hard to socialize. But when you go into VR, you can be anyone, live anywhere. And there's definitely an element that could possibly say, well, that's not really the real world, right? But to give that capability, that sense of I can be who I am inside, it's definitely a wonderful experience. And if we could actually, it's almost too idealistic. To Martina's point, right? The fact that unfortunately in this real world we do have this bias. Maybe from living in a little bit more in virtual reality, that'll help the real world get a little bit better too.
Are you ready to be here for a whole night? I feel that there are a couple of things I want to point out, just to share my thoughts with you. I do agree that you can be, as a first-person experience, you can be anyone, be comfortable in VR, right? Because that's the avatar that represents you. However, I want us to think beyond the true power of immersive media is the stories can transform the way people look at you. That you can be yourself and you interact with others. You take the bias out of it, but you are still you. So to truly solve the issue of bias is not in VR, it's really here in human's brain. And how do we unlock that transformative nature to change how people treat each other is what I think is a very positive thing for VR.
This has gotten much heavier than I thought. Jude, you talked about the importance of the user experience, and that's a key, that might be something holding things back a bit, and that the experience needs to get better to really push things forward. Talk about the user experience for a second.
So I always say VR is both inside of a goggle and outside of a goggle. If maybe in the future the goggle is no longer a form factor. So experience is really more important. Technology is just a foundation. And I say inside of the goggle is a destination, and outside of the goggle is a journey. People will remember a journey, and people will take selfie at the destination. So you just want. So I would love to see more experiences that focus on the story and really take out the emotion out of a human being. So I'm not a big proponent for violent games in all the events. I don't support, and deliberately don't support that. And I also wanted to focus on the user experience is from the minute you step into the door, looking forward to immerse with a piece of content. So that really included the staging and how the operators put the headset on you, how they clean it, and how do they explain this piece with you. So I would say on that end, curator is very important for a great user experience.
Any other thoughts on curation?
I was just going to share a couple quick examples of that. I think that's so spot on, and some of the best experiences I've seen in the last 18 months or so think about the user experience long before someone puts on a headset. And so one example is a really cool experience called Where Thoughts Go that has been at a lot of different festivals. And so I first saw it at Tribeca last year, and you approach the booth. You know, everyone has approximately the same amount of real estate at this festival. It's not a huge amount of space in the room, but they were able to transform their little booth into essentially a pillow fort. They had sheets and really cool lights and pillows on the floor. And so you felt like you were a kid at a slumber party, and you had to kind of crawl into this space. And then you also felt contained. So there was some degree of privacy and safety, because that's a huge problem actually in some of these public spaces, is people feel very self-conscious and vulnerable. They have a headset on, they can't see the rest of the world, and it becomes kind of this weird spectator sport. So with Where Thoughts Go, they made it, you know, a much more private, intimate room, just using sheets, and then you go into the experience. And that to me really stood out. Of all, I probably saw like 25 experiences that day, but that one was by far the best because of those simple touches and the way that the attendant sort of ushered me in and set the stage, and the whole thing was just so well thought out. So I don't know, and you're just really the expert here on where people could see some of this stuff locally. I travel around a lot and see it, so I don't know if there are places that you'd recommend. I'd love to just make it tangible for folks where they could go try some of this stuff. If there's, I know some places in LA, if you're ever in LA, but are there places here you'd recommend?
One of the places right here, right? So, Pacific Science Center. So there are some of the pop-up that I've been seeing. So what's very interesting about those pop-up is they actually integrate stories. So there was a Bauhaus pop-up just last week. So the German Foundation actually, they integrated the story about the 1920s architecture story, and they integrated with a VR experience. So think about story combining with the VR experience is very powerful.
The question now is about gaming, how to break out of the gaming. The word cloud is kind of interesting, just to tell the panel what's behind it. Here's a great quote. At times we want to escape our polluted reality, not augment it with digital debris. I love that quote. Jeff, you're talking about the solo experiences changing in a positive way. What do you mean by that?
And this actually adds on nicely what Jude was just saying. So when we first started into the VR arena, everything was just you, and you were isolated, and it was fun and amazing, but it got boring pretty quickly, to be honest. You could make stuff interactive, and that was better. But then one of our clients said, could you actually allow me to come in there at the same time? And we explored it, and we did. And now every single Friday, 6 a.m., supposedly 45 minutes, but pretty much every single time it goes for an hour and a half, we go into one of our worlds collaboratively, and we communicate in completely new ways that we've never done before. That's one example. Another example, which is we're going to be rolling out pretty soon, which is something true and dear to my heart. We're working with UW and Harborview, and we're looking at building some immersive technologies which are going to be collaborative for SCI patients, so spinal cord injury patients. Their whole life is essentially closed off to a certain extent, right? When they wake up after finding out they've been paralyzed from the neck down, it's a really, really hard experience. What we can do with VR is rehabilitate them, and let me rephrase that. What we're trying to do, I'm not going to say we've done it or we have proof of this, but the plan here is, from talking to these patients and getting them involved, from talking to the nurses, the doctors, the PTs, the OTs, getting all of that input in, we can, for example, put a 360 camera on Jesse or Tyler, for example, take them down a high street, and then they, to the bias comment that Martina mentioned earlier, you put a 360 camera on someone who's in a wheelchair, who's fully paralyzed, going down just the center of a mall, and you'll see people and children and adults look, stare, point, and it's horrific. It really is. But it's also a part of our nature, unfortunately, because we don't see many people, and we have this natural tendency to want to explore and want to ask them questions, but we're too shy. And so by putting a camera on that, we can give the new patients that experience of what it's going to be like before they go out in the real world. So it's not a horrific shock that they're kind of expecting, but they don't really understand what it's going to be like. But also, of course, we can give that experience to their friends and their family, so you get that empathy. It's a whole new level of empathy that VR opens up to us. And then taking that experience further, they'll go into an assistive technologies lab, and in there they can put a headset on and be connected with someone who used to be a patient but is now a tutor, who is now at home or on holiday on a beach or wherever they want to be, actually seeing what the other person sees, being in that same room with them despite being potentially thousands of miles away, being there to talk to them, being there to explain what's going on, the nuances that they have, and it just, Ricardo mentioned it too, it brings people together in completely unique environments. That this solo experience is definitely not the way forward, but this new ability to socialize in completely new ways is such a wonderful thing.
So when you talk about communicating differently in the first part of that, give me an example of that.
And we could actually show some people here too. There's a really fun little thing that we're now putting into all of our solutions. It's usually an Easter egg. We kind of stumbled on it by accident. Many people here may have heard of something called Tilt Brush, right? Which is this 3D paint thing, which is awesome if you can paint the Titanic in under 3 minutes. Most people can't do that. But what we do is we put those pens in hidden locations within our experiences. So if you go to a museum, for example, and you could be back to that curation point, I can grab one of these pens and I hear the kids who are over here who perhaps want to visit the Pacific Science Center but can't because they live in Alabama, right? But they can in VR now. Now they're in here and you've got Diana over there who's giving them a curated tour because she can do that in 15 minutes without actually leaving her home now, because we're in the future, we're now really. But then the kids will go, Pat, what is this exactly? That looks like a glass bottle or a plastic bottle. How does that work? And she could grab one of these pens and she could annotate this, right? She could be drawing in three-dimensionality right in front of us. She could switch that and change it for another object and explain. Because now the full internet of 3D models are at our fingertips too. So now we have this ability to not only become more socially aware, but also to interact in completely new ways that just take the real world and say this is kind of useless compared to what VR could bring.
Okay, I want to begin to open it up also to the audience. So if you show me your hand, I will run up and let you ask a question. So if anybody wants to dive into the question, just show me your hand. It might take me a couple seconds to see it, so bear with me. Here.
I want to explore the dark side. My son is in the back. He's 33 or so. He is the dark side. All right? But not as a jest. I mean, 3 people mentioned it. Are we talking about sexting? Are we talking about invasion of personal privacy? Just some simple examples of what the risks are.
Do we want to cover your son's ears for this answer, or let him hear it?
You don't want to hear more than he does. So.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody want to tackle it, go deeper into the dark side?
Just an example. Personal privacy, what is a concern?
Yeah, so privacy is definitely part of it. So with VR right now already, and this is only going to continue to be more true over time, we can just measure a lot more about a user than ever before. So there's eye tracking, so you know where people are gazing, you know how long they're interacting with various objects, and so it's great in that it's great for improving products. And one really simple example that's benign, but I think you can kind of start to see where this could go is there was just a project a few months ago released where it was a merchandising study, and they were bringing subjects through, and this was transparent, the subjects knew what was happening, but they were tracking where their eyes went on a shelf, and then they adjusted product displays accordingly. So harmless, great research, very useful, but you can imagine how if the user wasn't aware, if you're just in another experience and everything you do is being tracked without your consent, and suddenly the environment changes, and it gets into this territory where, and we're seeing this in other platforms too. This isn't unique to VR. It's just, I would say, far more intimate in VR, and more that the data is just a lot more robust that you can use to manipulate a user interaction, and so that's where I start getting concerned, is when there isn't transparency and people aren't opting into sharing that data. Then sometimes it can go in a more malicious direction in terms of how people could be manipulated. So that's one example. I think there's some interesting research, and there's more accumulating over time. We're really just beginning to understand some of this, but there's interesting research that indicates that people remember really immersive VR experiences as lived experiences. And I've experienced this anecdotally, where when I first got into the field, I was spending 5+ hours a day in the headset, which is probably not advisable. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, but I was really excited about it. And I would remember one person actually who was mentioned earlier in the program, Forrest Gibbs and I were in the headset together a lot, and then we'd also see each other in person. And I was confusing memories of when we were, in a VR experience and in person, which was cool. It was kind of interesting. It was an interesting experiment. But I think when you get into really violent content, there's just a lot we don't know. And so that's part of where I think just applying more resources to research and really understanding if we're exposing people to violent content or certain kinds of sexual content or whatever it might be, what does that mean cognitively? And I think there are just still questions there that need to be researched.
This is a loaded question because I know at least one person here. Does anybody here have a background in physics? Actually, that's quite a few. Yeah, indeed, great. So I do too. There's this thing called GUTS, right? Grand Unified Theories. What that means is, in layman's terms, if you have enough data, you can essentially predict anything you want. If you think about it, the VR and AR definitely is interesting, but this is the scary object that we should be scared of, right? This tracks everywhere we go. It tracks the speed when we travel from one distance to another. If the police got hold of that, they'd know that you traveled at 75 miles an hour on average. There's so much data being tracked around us that there's a lot of our behaviors that in the future could be turned into experiential models to determine everything from our health side to our personal lives. That's the scary side for me, when your kid is born and right away they know what your chances are of going to jail, right? And there's that movie, what's that movie with Tom Cruise? Minority Report, thank you, right? I mean, that's where we're going. The more and more of this data's out there, the more these things can be predictive. And as everybody knows, these predictive models work overall, but the false positives are the things where that real dark side comes in. You're accused of something that might happen in the future that may actually not happen, but there's enough data to support it, saying we don't want to take a risk on you.
So there's the old trope that violent video games and violent movies were creating violent people. I don't necessarily buy that. But all of you talked about the line blurring between reality and fantasy. And I'm wondering if this AR/VR industry actually brings that trope a bit to life, that the line blurs. And so, talk about the ultimate dark side.
Yeah, I'd like to add my bit on this topic. Yes, VR is a unique medium because it's the first time that you have a device that will create a memory that you're gonna retain as having been there and having done that thing. This has never been possible before. This is not possible with video games, for example. So playing a violent video game isn't as visceral and powerful, I would say, as virtual reality, because you really start, we were talking about empathy earlier, right? So there's the other side of empathy, which is that you really start feeling like you're killing human beings. And there's a lot of first-person shooter out there, games. So I would say that VR is pretty dark right now. That's kind of the good news, because I see us going beyond games and beyond the, let's just say, mediocre stuff that we've had, for lack of a better term. We haven't really evolved the human condition yet, but we have the potential to do so. And the dark aspect of it, because dark is hard to define, right? What is dark? Some people will look at something that's extremely violent and say, I'm completely okay with that. And some people will say, I don't even want to get near that. And we have a lot of that in VR. So dark is hard to define, but I would say that it's something that we already have in terms of, let's just say, building the next internet. That's how I see this industry. I would say, who here really wants to go backwards, because the internet that we have today has facilitated the exchange of, commerce of illegal drugs and, the children that are sex slaves or whatever, right? Because the internet has definitely facilitated that, money laundering, that sort of a thing. But that's just part of life, and we do have laws, and we do have standards for what's criminal and what's not, and the government can definitely do something about that as the governments have. So I don't see that as like my problem to solve. But the one thing that I want to add is that absolutely there's going to be a lot more data that's available in terms of your location, your identity, where you're looking, what you're looking at. And I just try to lead by example by bringing great educational content, because people a lot of times don't understand what VR is. VR is still being defined for a lot of people. A lot of people have not experienced around the world. So it's amazing to me that I've had people come to our lab in Seattle years after having an experience in VR, and they say, I didn't know that VR wasn't just games. And that just blows my mind. So I think I look at it the other way. If we get in front of somebody with something educational or something of great taste, like you were describing earlier, Martina, they're going to think that VR is that, and they're not even going to think about the dark side of it.
To answer your question, I feel that there are dark things we will inherit from one generation of media to the next. The right way to think about is how different is VR, and how do we leverage that opportunity to eliminate those dark things, right? So the privacy is not born in VR. So I wouldn't say that's a VR native dark side. However, VR does have the immersive nature, so certain negativity will be more immersed, so that have more impact on human being. So I would think more philosophically there, versus just chase after one specific instance.
And I just wanted to add a little nuance to what I said earlier about the.
The question was asked up there right
Oh.
now, we're talking about this. Would you be comfortable using a platform knowing that the developer could store your physical information? So as you're answering this
A
question,
lot of people are thinking maybe. A lot of people in the maybe zone.
and it's evenly balanced between yes and no. When it
Yeah.
started, it was like yes for this and no was 60%.
Huh, interesting.
So you're influencing the answer.
She's a very influential person. Go ahead, Margie.
I just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to what I said earlier in starting the discussion about violent content, and that I think there's a question about how it could influence real-world behavior, and Ricardo was saying, like I said, there's just still a lot of questions there, but there's also the question of psychological trauma, and I think that's actually something we are starting to understand. There's a little bit more information there, and one example is a couple of years ago, a woman wrote an article about an experience being groped in VR. She was playing a game, it was an archery game, and another player came up, and they were not in the same physical location. You know, this person had no physical contact whatsoever, but his avatar groped her avatar, and she wrote a really thoughtful article about how violated she felt in that instance, despite no physical contact. And it opened up a really rich dialogue around this theme of, you know, safety in VR and how we can experience psychological trauma even if we're not in the same physical space. And so I think that's just another consideration there, is that because I'm so excited about the ability to convey physical presence and the connection and the opportunity therein. However, there's also, you know, considerations there in making sure that we're protecting people in those environments and protecting them from certain types of content that might be traumatizing.
You knew this was going to happen. We heard from Dad, now we hear from the son.
Actually, on that article you're talking about, immediately after that came out, I remember the program, I forget the name of the actual application, but they immediately implemented personal space bubbles that you can turn on. But the other part I was going to point out was the extreme dark side of VR, where if someone's playing a violent video game and they become addicted to that. If any of you have ever seen Sword Art Online, the original series was, if you die in the game, you die in real life. The next one was someone became addicted to killing other players, and they actually hunted other players in real life while they were playing another AR video game. So that is extreme level. But my actual question actually was moving on from this, if anybody wants to. How do you factor in the changes between the user interface in VR versus AR? And how would you look to the future for possible implementation of better user interfaces?
So we can start by talking about the now, and then perhaps we'll go into the future to answer that. So VR comes out, the first thing we're doing is interacting with our hands on these hand controls, right? And potentially with some eye gaze stuff too. If you actually look over here, all of this stuff I think helps answer where we're going. And this is actually even on NASA right now, they're testing out different haptic solutions for different feedback mechanisms. So rather than have a heads-up display with 200 different things about your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your sweat level, your oxygen level, blah, 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 they actually have little haptic sensors all around their body, and with a little bit of training, they know a certain vibration instantly means, oh, I need a little bit more oxygen here, or my tank's running out, I've got to get back to base, right? These little nuances that we're just starting to better understand of how our body works and how we can integrate these different experiences, these different exo experiences almost, right? That can completely change how we move, how we interact, and how we experience.
Jude, talk about game focus versus non-game focus. We seem to be kind of circling that issue. So,
I love games, so I think gamification is a very profound engagement tool for any experience. So before I talk about that, I have one more thing kind of along the line, but that will naturally go into the game, non-game. So anyone went to the library sales a couple of days ago? If you cannot find any anthropology books, because I bought them, so that goes into when I look at user interface and user interaction, looking to how historically we've evolved and how do we use our hands and what is the most intuitive way. So that's one dimension I look at it. And the second dimension is how do we turn it upside down to make something super creative. So that's very much my design thinking when I think about user interface. For an example, I'm blowing a kiss at you, right? So previously, you cannot see my kiss. However, in VR, why don't you visualize that? How about to turn that kiss into a bubble and you can write it and throw back at me? So so this is how I look at user interface is innovation, but in conjunction with our very nature.
anyone else? I'm confused. We have major education needs in terms of society, corporate training programs, there's big budgets, there's our education system. There's a million applications where taking static, dull information and making it immersive and more interesting would greatly benefit society. Yet it strikes me this industry, granted it's new, is really isolated off here in a corner. What's it going to take to make this stuff mainstream so that it can really have the impact that I believe it should have?
So I love this question because I get to talk about a few of the amazing companies I work with. And there are a lot of incredible things already happening. So one example in education is a company called Alchemy, and they're doing chemistry and physics education in VR and AR. And instead of the old wooden models you use in organic chemistry to try to understand how a molecule organizes and how atoms interact, they actually bring that into VR, and you can have a far more immersive, gamified, and rich experience as part of that. And they've actually been able to significantly increase the rates of students passing organic chemistry in college. So that's just one example of sort of what's happening on the education side. On the training side, there's a ton happening. That's actually where a lot of money is being made in VR right now. So a couple of the companies we work with, one is called Embodied Labs, and they are doing senior care training for caregivers in hospice and nursing home settings, as well as different kinds of customer service interactions where the demographic that the company is serving tends to be older. And so they're immersing people, they're doing a couple of interesting ways. they're doing the provider perspective, so you're put in the shoes of the job you'll be doing and practice that way. But they're also putting you in the patient or client perspective, where you get to understand, maybe, for example, if the patient has had a stroke and has limited vision, they simulate that so that you can kind of go through that experience, and then when you're providing care later to someone suffering, from that some limited vision, you have a better sense of, oh, why did they only eat half of their plate? Well, it's because they can't see what's on the other half, and those sorts of things. So, there's a lot happening in both education and training that's very exciting. I could talk all night long, but I'll relinquish the mic.
Now I'm going to be Ricardo's puppet, in fact, and cue him up. We make most of our money from education, training, and assessments. Unfortunately, most of that stuff we're not allowed to talk about, which is a tragedy, because there's so much interesting things going on that unfortunately it's companies and governments and things with lots of money that are only the ones able to afford that at the moment. But there's two local companies who are changing that. One of them, DigiPen. The students coming out of DigiPen, it might have even been an MIT report actually. One of the top universities produced a report about the best VR and AR companies to learn from. And DigiPen, I think, came in at number 3. Yeah. And I think it might have even been the world. I mean, it was insane. DigiPen is up there as one of the most amazing companies. It's a private education system, right? But to actually learn and teach about it. But the other one, of course, is Kronos Global Academy, right? I don't know how many non-full-on schools there are in the world, but there's not many. And we're lucky enough to have one of those companies right here, right in Seattle, because there's a ton of money being pumped into the product side, but very little into, hey, let's build some experiences that we can really leverage and give that to the mass market. And there's people like Ricardo who are trying to change that.
The panel is now just sucking up with each other. It's very painful.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you for that. I wasn't thinking of that, but education is something I'm very passionate about. It's, I think, after food for human beings is probably the most important thing. So, education is one of the things that's changing very fast in our world, and I don't have answers right now. We're just addressing it as we see it and as it's changing. But for example, we've come from a time when it was like in my, when I was growing up, my dad would say, get a job, get good grades, and climb the corporate ladder. Now, I'm from Brazil, right? So in Brazil, there's actually an additional requirement, which is learn English, which is the universal language for business, right? If you do those things, you're gonna do really well in life. And growing up, I started thinking, no, I want to go beyond that. I want to start a company. I want to make a difference in the world. I don't want to climb the corporate ladder. I think climbing the corporate ladder, it just doesn't work anymore. I think everybody would agree with that, right? So it's kind of an old thinking that worked for a time because things evolved very slowly 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So it was common to see people that would, start working for a company and stay there all their life. And this is not common anymore. However, I will point out that I've noticed that this does happen at Boeing, which is a large employer here that we've been working with, and I'm just amazed to see that some people have been there for 34 years. However, that's very unusual. So more and more we're getting to a point where people don't identify themselves with a profession as much anymore. In other words, people have been doing 2-3 different professions in their life. So this requires faster training, and getting a 4-year degree can really be part of the equation, because if you're going to be doing 3 or 4 different professions, that means you'd be getting 16 years in just higher education, and that's just not practical. Now, I'm not even getting into high technology, because when you get into the fields that we're in, 4 years is just a lot of time. We can't even imagine the world in 4 years from now. So getting a degree to let's just say, be an employee in a VR company just doesn't even apply as I see it. So I'm addressing that by coming up with, like, our goal, the goal of our organization is to train people as fast as we can. We're not a school, so we don't have a 2-year program or a 4-year program trying to keep people there learning humanities or what have you. It's like, how fast can you become a VR developer? And so we've experimented with a lot of different people. We've had hundreds of students. We've worked with people. We worked with the city of Seattle that sponsored a group of students that had no IT background. We figured out how many hours it took. It's more than twice as long than the typical, engineer that we have in our area that already are used to working with computers and, more than 8 hours a day. So it's been great and very rewarding. I want to expand beyond teaching people VR, AR development, of course. And that's something that we are doing. So I want to get into an area where we teach people anything, because simulation is the best way to learn anything that you want to learn, short of doing the real thing itself. So that's something that we're doing. Another thing that we're doing that's kind of new is that since I started the organization, I was thinking, bringing people into a setting with a knowledgeable instructor is very powerful, right? Because you can just raise your hand and ask a question, and there's a way that we can teach that's extremely effective. However, we are limited. We're limited by having people here in Seattle that can come into our office. Now we have an office in San Francisco. It's a very high cost to us. It's very difficult to do, but it's just not practical. So obviously the answer is to offer something that people can do in virtual reality. So we have a course coming up in which we are attempting to do that. We're actually using the Big Screen app, and we're going to see how that goes. We've already done some experimentation, but that's a step towards getting 1 or 2 students from anywhere in the world that want to be a part of our course, our program, but interacting with the other students, interacting with the instructor. So that's just a little bit about what we're doing. Thanks for the intro, Jeff.
I've got a question up here.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is around the safety and ethics. So we have this amazing, cool technology. I love it. And we also talk about how it can help create new experiences around inclusion and diversity and different ways to connect with people. On the flip side, though, we call it immersive technology because you're immersing in a different reality than the real reality, reality itself. And we look at the world today and the impact of social media on kids and just some bad actors that just happen with technology, and we know that's going to happen. So my question is around how do you envision this being governed? We can say we should have responsible corporate citizens that act in the right manner, but in my mind, I think you can make the argument maybe the Surgeon General should be looking at some of this and the impact on children's minds of this very, very unknown technology.
Who's the adult in the room here?
I want to, since I'm passing the mic, I'm going to just mention a couple of things quickly. I think VR has a great opportunity to self-regulate before all the governance start to be coming from the government, because the reason government needs to govern is the ecosystem does not govern itself very well. So I would say one of my biggest, what I want to advocate for a great experience to begin with is you always want to include the industry expert. So if you are doing a medical app, you do need to include a doctor. If you are doing an education app, why won't you include teacher? And the second dimension to keep in mind is VR is moving from R&D into commercialization. And we want to have that kind of open mentality. The fact that you are asking those questions is already contributing to it, because we probably didn't ask the right question when social media was just started. So we don't want to repeat that era, right? So that's just my kind of philosophical take on that. Now,
I'm a little skeptical watching Facebook trusting the industry to regulate itself. Is there any other solution?
Big data, which is the dark side that we spoke about earlier, right? There's a good side and there's a bad side. At the end of the day, I come from a big data background too, right? And there is so much power, so much value in this that we can start to anonymize the data to perhaps try and regulate it and bring in a body that can analyze that data. The trick is ensuring that that data doesn't get misused. If it gets misused, there's a whole heap of trouble. But it's a balance. It's a scale that says how much oversight do we want into our personal lives versus how can we preemptively build that bubble that stops that situation. We don't know that answer, and the only way I think we can ever get there is by keeping this debate open, keeping people being able to put their hand up and say, I've just felt violated in that experience. I think the biggest problem we do face, though, it is so new that who would have thought that was even a problem when it first came out? And now it's so obvious, but there's a whole host of those kind of problems that we're going to come to. But I think collaboratively, again, that's where the power comes in. We figure out a body that we can report this and we can figure out ways to do it. And then it's a matter of working with typically the bigger companies that supply some of these solutions and the products themselves to actually build in things like these bubbles straight out of the gate.
Anybody else? Another question up here? Do you want to dive in?
We can go on to the next one.
Yeah, a lot of what we're talking about is what I would consider the positive applications of virtual reality, education, experiential, camaraderie, what have you. But I'm also very concerned about where I think the earliest uses of VR will be, and that will be to displace more customer care and customer services positions. I think there's just an incredibly enormous number of people who are going to be losing the ability to work because so much of the retail experience, the customer servicing experience can be put into algorithms and driven by cloud, and you get the avatar that you prefer to communicate with. I mean, I'm sure we're all right now, in the last several years, you can't call customer care without going through 5-10 minutes of the old VR, voice recognition. And they keep you in the queue and they do everything they need, and then finally you speak to a human being. And I'm very troubled that I think before you see VR augmented teaching, you're going to see VR augmented Nordstroms and Amazon, and you don't need as many sales clerks. And I don't know where all those tens of millions of people will go. You may have 10,000 people coding, but they could be displacing 10 million people with those positions.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is where it could get really interesting with creating new virtual economies and new ways of, so taking those people who were previously in customer service roles or a whole plethora of other types of roles that will likely, with a combination of AI and XR, no longer be as relevant, and creating new opportunities to create value. And so one version of that, which may sound dystopian or utopian depending on your perspective, is essentially a gamified economy where people are playing or interacting in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be a game, but they're interacting in some way in a virtual environment that provides value, usually through data, to a company in some way, and they're compensated for that. And what I like about that model, and there's so many ways that can manifest, I realize that's ambiguous, but just the basic framework of virtual transactions, virtual interactions, creating some kind of new purpose and job and compensation for someone, is that what I like about it is that that's already happening all the time. Of course, we're all creating value for companies with every click, every page view, all of these things. But there are systems emerging now where there's more transparency and ability for the end user to claim that value. And that's, I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that could help to give people new opportunities in a very different sort of digital economy. So that's one potential solution.
Any other thoughts on this job-killing machine that you're all involved with?
What I want to say is that this is not unique for VR, right? So auto drive truck is going to potentially replace is a very negative word, but it's going to take away a lot of first-hand drivers' work. But when I think about a good product manager, when they develop a product, when you take away from the society something, you need to put it back in. So that is the new generation of entrepreneur really need to think about. So that's why I'm very excited about what Ricardo is doing in terms of education for technology, because the maker movement is happening. So the people who actually hold the key to make a product, even if it's a digital product, is going to be the future. And we need educators to really put that power into that group of people who's going to lose job. And we need to do it as fast as possible.
Yes. Jeff, you commented on VR defaults are exclusive, not as inclusive as people think. What did you mean by that?
So I've mentioned before how we do quite a few things with the disabled community, and we, since the beginning pretty much of our company 5 years ago, and we're still self-funded, so everything we do, we have to figure out, okay, balance this out, can we afford to put a little bit extra here to make sure this is inclusive as we can be? And we've always prided ourselves on delivering solutions that are mostly accessible, right? I joined an assistive technologies board, and the first thing I did is get with a group of people who had never experienced VR or AR, and invited them into my lab, our lab, and stuck them in different experiences. And the first thing, we were so proud that you can use voice control and move around, right? We can do this, that you don't need, if you haven't got use of your hands, it's okay, we've got different ways of looking at it. One thing we didn't consider is when you're in a wheelchair, you're naturally tilted back. So this is your experience. And we just said, oh my goodness, there is a huge population here that we thought we would cater for, and we didn't. And every time we learn of a new disability, we come to learn VR as a default doesn't work there yet. What's wonderful is that there are definitely some movements going on. We actually regularly talk with Microsoft, who have a whole team, 2 teams in fact, that are trying to tackle these across all devices. They're working with us and loads of other companies, I'm sure, as well, but to actually promote companies like us, trying to get all of these different assistive technologies in the hands of everybody else. And what's really wonderful for me is it not only opens up the doors for people with those disabilities, but it actually also opens new doors for those that are fully able to. And this is where it starts to get exciting, when we start to be able to use our eyes for movement, our feet for movement, our brains for movement. And we're just touching the tip of this iceberg.
Okay, I'm going to prepare the panel that you're going to do your final comment. So your final comment can be something that's not been brought up so far, can be whatever you want it to be. But let's start. Martina, why don't you go and we'll come this way. Final thoughts.
I didn't have any chance to prepare. Well, I would just say that I appreciate that the conversation sort of dove deep into the darker aspects, what we talked a bit about. But I do want to reiterate that there's huge opportunity, and I believe that this technology is going to be a very, very positive force in the world. But I think the way we need to make that happen is for more people to contribute. So that, kind of back to the solution side of thinking, and to Jeff's earlier point about not knowing what you don't know, and if we have more people in the room, we're going to find some of those gaps faster, and we're going to be able to get in front of some of the things we might not otherwise see if everyone was thinking the same way. So I just wanted to end on a slightly more optimistic note. I feel like I was a little Debbie Downer tonight. I didn't mean to be, but as much as it's important, I definitely believe in being aware of the downside. But I really do think this is a tremendous force for good.
I want to share a thought that is around the question that the last gentleman asked, which I've been thinking about how to answer. And it has to do with, I see the world changing and changing very fast, and I don't see a way to fight what we may call progress. And I am not interested in trying to be idealistic about something that I think is inevitable. So one of the things that I'm talking about is actually the results of automation that we're seeing that are going to be very big in the near future. I think that there are technologies that are very mature right now that for some reason haven't been brought to market, but inevitably they're going to, because they're going to save companies a lot of money. Self-driving vehicles come to mind. That's one of the things. Robots are very advanced now. And so I think that we are going to have we're going to be facing a time when a lot of people just, their jobs are just, what they've been doing is obsolete. It's not necessary anymore because a robot can do it better and cheaper. What I would like to see is a platform where people can go and learn a new trade and create anything they want to create. And I also don't want to see us losing the human touch. So you had mentioned something that had to do with service, right? And if people gain something from that human interaction when they're getting service from a real human being, I don't think that has to go away. And VR doesn't have to make that go away. But that's about it.
So for things that we haven't covered, I would say, you know, I'm a big on writing stories and telling a story through VR as a transformative medium. And I would say, think about how that can change the gender bias or a role bias, right? Or any of the bias towards a certain group of people by building characters that is different from what we have been historically built. Why we always see mom in the kitchen? Why we cannot build a character that is not a mom in the kitchen? So why we always see an avatar of AI assistant is always a female? How do we change that? And it's just really a good opportunity for us to start something new and creative as well. We've been same for 400 years or even more. VR is really a great place for us to disrupt that.
So to wrap it up, from my perspective, I'll use an acronym of ACE, ACE, which is adapt, collaborate, and experience. And what I mean by that is there is this dark side. But what we find is whenever these arguments come out, we learn, we adapt. Amazon comes out and it's going to knock every single mall out of business. And to be fair, it has knocked out a lot of malls and a lot of shops. But there's a reason for that, and that's because people prefer that experience. And if they didn't, Amazon would die out and the shops would come back. And maybe that will happen. I can't predict the future. But what happens is we adapt and different businesses start up and the economy changes. So I'm definitely a believer in that as an evolutionary species, we are amazing at adapting and creating new jobs. We don't know where it's going, but it's going to be interesting to find out. On the collaboration side, we're part of the Mars Society, and I don't know if you guys are aware of that. This is an incredible society that's trying to send 100 people to Mars, right? Or a group of people to Mars. I'd say 100, don't know exactly the number right now. We're going to send a load of people to Mars. We're building the base of what's going to happen on Mars, on Earth, in VR. So you could be anyone, anywhere throughout the world and get to learn what that base camp's going to be like on Mars. And we're going to build that. We've built that already to a certain extent. And over the next 7 years, as different probes go, they're going to pick up more and more data. They're going to bring it back to us, and we're going to change out our current surface, which is actually based off of partly from Utah and partly from Mars, and we're going to replace it with the actual textures of Mars itself, so that people can be trained here before they go there. And this is going to be completely open source, and everybody's going to be able to experience it and improve upon it. And that collaboration, I think, is definitely crucial for the success of the industry and as a species. The last part is experience. Hands up here if you've never experienced a VR before. Actually, like, put a headset on. It's actually, I don't know if people are being shy or not, but this is one of the...
Somebody put a headset on that guy.
The most amazing thing with VR is you can see it on a screen, but until you put that headset on, you have no idea of how immersive that is. So my leaving comment would be, if you get a chance, try it.
A great quote that I came across, virtual reality is a plausible explanation for the abundance of virtual people running around these days. Just love that thought. I want to compliment the panel. You didn't have your personal bubble. We took some shots at you, and you responded very well. I thought you brought this topic to life very well. You were very open. I thought we covered a lot of ground. So could we have a semi-raucous round of applause for the panel? In closing, we want to thank the MIT Enterprise Forum. They have programs every Wednesday, every month, so check out the email that you got this from, Town Hall, all the other sponsors. Thank you very much. And this was a great conversation. I appreciate everybody participating. Thanks all.